Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 439 featuring Halsey Burgund, who is an incredible artist and technologist. As you guys can tell, I have I am very hoarse because I've been SIGGRAPHing hard and been doing a lot of stuff with SIGGRAPH, so it's been really rough. But I'm dedicated to making sure that I get this podcast intro out, and it was a really amazing one with Halsey. He is, like I said, an artist and technologist. He's done some incredible things with both audio and video in terms of how he tries to create his art. He's been doing a lot of stuff in museums and things of that nature, so we talk a lot about that. But one of the great projects that he did is something called Moon Disaster, where he reimagined if the moon landing went very wrong, and he created a video of that and used a lot of technology like deepfake technology, etc., to change the way that history happened, and sort of did that as an art piece. And it's a fascinating story, fascinating to talk about why he did it and how he did it. So really cool to have him on. I really want to thank my good friend Ryan for suggesting that he be on the podcast, and it was awesome to have him on. So thank you so much. Really cool to have him. Okay, we have a couple of announcements. First of all, in terms of our product line, I think I mentioned this before, but you should definitely go check it out. We have Phoenix 5 Update 2 is out, and of course V-Ray 6 for Houdini Update 1 is out, and our big one obviously is Vantage 2, which is something that I'm very excited about and has been a big conversation piece over at SIGGRAPH, and it is really huge. And if you don't know what Vantage 2 is, it is our real-time ray tracer. And in fact, I did an entire episode about it with Simeon just a couple of episodes back. So go check that out if you're more interested in that. In terms of events, you can just find out all these events if you go to chaos.com/events. I will be at the Rainbow Conference in London, which is August 29th through the 31st. And in fact, I will give a talk at that conference, and that talk is going to be on August 31st itself. So I would love to see you guys there if you're going to be at the Rainbow Conference in London. Okay. And now, in terms of the podcast, if you guys are interested to find out more about that, of course, you can just go to our podcast page where you can see all of the different episodes we've had. That is at chaos.com/CGGarage. And of course, you can always follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/CGGarage podcast. If you'd like to watch these podcasts, always suggested that you do that. You can always see us on youtube.com/chaosgrouptv. But if you'd like to make suggestions, in fact, we're getting some really great suggestions, please don't forget to email us, labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 439 with Halsey Burgund.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passe. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
You seem to like technology, Halsey.
Well, I do. I appreciate it, and I like it, and I also am scared by certain parts of it and encouraged by other parts of it, and sometimes the same thing that I'm, both scared and encouraged by. But yeah, I do. My creative work does tend to, lean on technology, I suppose. Somehow there's just an interest that I have in that, and thinking about, discovering new tools can be very inspiring. And it can be, you can think about new creative directions to go in based on the existence of a tool, or if a tool doesn't exist, then, the existence of tools to make new tools, which is, becoming more and more democratized, which is pretty cool. Still, you still need to have skills, many of which I don't have, but it's
Sure.
It's still more accessible than 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, for sure. So what? I mean, you obviously you've done an incredible amount of work as a transmedia artist, is what they used to call people like you back in the day.
Who knows? What
right?
that word is.
But what you have an art background or an art interest. Where did that all start?
Well, it really started from music, to be honest. I have always, from my, early days, young days of being a person, I have played various instruments and really sort of enjoyed creating music, listening to music, all of that. So when I was a kid, I took various, lessons and, piano and then trumpet and then drums. And drums were the thing that really sort of stuck, much to the chagrin of my parents. But
Right.
those sort of stuck with me through college and whatnot. So I was really sort of came at my sort of early creative work, so to speak. That makes it sound fancier than it is, but my creative endeavors, the things that got me excited were all sort of, audio and music specifically, rock and roll, things like that. I had bands in college and whatnot, and yeah, so I started out really sort of, somewhat traditional, music creation, and as I got out of college and started to I took various hiatuses in different directions, different types of creativity. I was a furniture maker for a little while, which was, totally different, but also fun, using the hands.
Carpentry?
Yeah, well, more like, fine furniture, like making, tables and, beds and chairs and things like that was, not as, sitting in front of a computer all the time. So I enjoyed
Sure.
that. And I still do some of that, but yeah, the music sort of stuck with me, and then it sort of gradually evolved for various reasons that I can go into, or some of which I probably can't even put a finger on. It evolved more towards sound art and more sort of audio objects that exist over time, rather than having specific start and end, and less sort of performance based and more kind of installation based, and that evolution sort of happened over quite some time, and I still do a lot of that work, and that involves various degrees of technology. And
how do you get into that? I mean, how do you basically say, I want to install something in your place, or how does that happen?
Yeah, usually it's more the other way around. Will you install something in my place?
Well,
which takes a while to get to the point where museums and whatnot are interested in that. The good thing about what I do is it is non-destructive in a physical sense. So
Sure.
there's not a huge amount of. I mean, that's a challenge in other places, in other sort of an awareness sense, but from an installation sense, it's the installation is on a computer. And it's funny, some of the early places 15 years ago when I started doing this, museums would often say, well, where's the computer that's running this? And I'd be like, oh, well, it's in my house, my studio, connected to the internet. They're like, you've got to bring it here. It has to be on site, because we're a museum that sort of, our thing is physical objects. So we need to have the computer. The thing that is the only physical manifestation of this project needs to be on site. It wasn't like anybody could see it. It was just they had this sort of comfort in the physicality of the device.
But what was going on at the museum? Was it, obviously there's a lot of sound involved and music involved, but was it just an auditory experience that they were having?
Yeah, it was like geolocated audio. A lot of my early work is geolocated audio. So placing bits of audio, musical compositions in a physical landscape, such that a participant, somebody interested in experiencing the piece, would walk around a physical landscape, whether it's a sculpture park or some kind of a urban leafy urban park of some sort, or anything. As they walk through there, the path that they go on determines what they hear based on this software that I developed called Roundware, which enables you to essentially place pieces of audio that are components of the final piece, and then you, as you're walking through this piece, are kind of assembling them. You're not doing anything to assemble them other than walking, but the act of walking and changing your location tells the system how you are moving through a space, and it creates a sort of audio soundtrack to go along with you as you go.
So you have headphones on, or are there speakers in different locations?
No, there's headphones, and it would be an app-based thing, so that the phone knows. I mean, I started this before GPS was in your pocket, and that was a real pain to do.
So how did you geolocate at that time? Sorry, I'm asking you all these questions.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Well, the initial ones were geolocated. What I cleverly called manual geolocation.
Uh-huh.
So there would be a series of more discrete series of locations within an area, and you would have to press a button on the screen of your little Nokia, first generation, stylus based computer and say, oh, I'm near this tree now. and then it would sort of go according to that. So it was much less fine grained and whatnot, but it still did have I could compose something around that restriction.
Interesting.
And that was okay. But once it was fine grained and GPS enabled, it became much more it just, again, a tool enabled different explorations from an artistic sense.
And you've done many of these installations. I was looking. I mean, you're very prolific. So you've done many of these type of installations.
Well, I'm either prolific or old, right? One or the other. Either I've been around for a really long time. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And yes, I've done them in lots of places. The software, this Roundware software, the software that I mentioned before, is sort of a platform that a lot of other folks have used as well. I've open sourced it so people can, check it out, either use it as it is or grab bits and pieces. The whole open source thing is very important to me, and that creates a community of sorts of people who like to, do walking art or, anything like that, which is really exciting. But yeah, lots of, pieces that have been a lot of art pieces, but then, got to make a living too, and that doesn't always pay the bills. So there have been museums, sort of some of the more progressive museums, that realize that traditional audio tours are kind of not the thing that people are too interested anymore. This kind of, broadcast model of some important curator telling you what you're supposed to think about the art as you wander through. So
Right.
a lot of museums have thought it's nicer to be able to sculpt your own a little bit as you walk. And one of the key components around Roundware is the ability to record as well. So there's not only listening as you walk through, but then if you want to make your own recording of what you think about a particular artwork or, something like that, you can pull out the phone, make that recording, upload that, and then it becomes part of the landscape, part of the audioscape for future people to listen to. So it's this dynamic situation.
So we could do a podcast while we're walking in the park, and that would be, people could re-experience that podcast geographically.
Yes, we could, and it would be pretty cool. I tend to like the best way to perhaps do something like that would be if you and I were together and we were actually walking together initially making recordings.
Yes.
And then we could kind of replace them where they were, because then there would be that connection between us and what we were talking about and how that might have been affected by what we were seeing and feeling from the physical landscape at that point, which I think is pretty exciting to sort of capture those moments. And then other people might have different feelings about, they will certainly have different feelings and experiences, and depends on the weather and other stuff like that that can be captured and sort of maintained in a certain spot.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really cool. So how long were you doing some of those projects? What year are we talking about? When did it all start?
This started probably about 15 years ago now,
Okay.
2008 maybe or something.
All right.
Like I literally started doing this, and while I was doing it, the iPhone 3GS.
Yeah, the
the
first iPhone came out 2007. So yeah, so it was the next one.
The 3GS might have been 8 or 9,
Yep.
something like that.
Yep.
And that really enabled, again, the first projects I did were not with smartphones. They were with these sort of early tablet things. They were kind of, we've all perhaps the Palm Pilot might be one of the more,
Yep.
heard of ones, but some of these, the Nokia ones, were a little more open in terms of the ability to program them and get them to do things that you wanted. But then of course the sound card, you can imagine the sound card in a Nokia,
Right.
N800 is, it was like 8-bit, it was like crunchy, scratchy.
Yeah, it is what it is. Yeah.
So yeah, that started back then, and Roundware is still sort of being developed. I wouldn't call it a fast pace,
Okay.
just because it's a labor of love, and there's not, the money is always a part of the equation, and but new projects come up, and I'm syncing audio now, which is really cool. So I have 6 different tracks, and they're kind of like as if they're in a DAW. They can be synced, so you can actually create a piece of music that is, very, very highly synced, like, drums and bass lines and all this kind of stuff. And as you wander through different parts, verse 1 is in this physical location, which is just a different way of thinking about a piece of music. Instead of verse 1 is
Certain
32
time.
seconds. Yes, exactly.
Right.
It's at a certain location, and that makes you think about the composition process, or at least makes me think about the composition process very differently, because
Right.
there's certain again, you're giving up certain aspects of control over over what somebody actually hears.
Sure.
But perhaps you're gaining something in the flexibility and the customizability on the other end. So
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Now you mentioned it's like obviously this doesn't pay the bills. So what was paying the bills at the time? What was helping you pay the bills?
well, some things that were related to this, in that when museums or cultural institutions wanted to deploy Roundware to create this sort of new type of experience for their audiences, although they could take the code for free and do it on their own, it was easier and probably cheaper
Mm-hmm.
to just hire me to do that. So I would deploy and customize Roundware for different organizations, and
Mm-hmm.
that helps pay the bills. There are other technology bits that skills that I can be hired to do. I haven't had a real job in quite some time, so to speak, real quote unquote.
There's no
Um,
such thing as a real.
but there's yeah, thank you. Okay, good. Yes, I like the independent part of it. Of
Sure.
course, there are big challenges to that too. More recently, with the AI work I've been doing, there's just the frenzy about that makes it gives me opportunities to consult in that sense on various projects, whether it's other audio things or whether it's synthetic media in film and things like that help sort of pay the bills. And then the other part is just don't live extravagantly, right? it's
Right. Live with.
I've got kids, they cost money, but it's like you just don't need to be
Right.
wild and crazy.
Okay.
So.
Well, I do want to get into the AI stuff, but obviously there's a lot of steps between what we talked about and how you got into some of the AI work. So let's talk a little bit about some of the other projects you were developing around that time.
Sure. Let me try to think of what's maybe another. Yeah, I mean, a lot of. I mean, the audio does do. There was a while where I was doing, the audio stuff that I've described. This sort of combination of building the technology to enable these projects, and then doing these sorts of projects and doing them in different parts of the world and under different circumstances. I did one in New Zealand, in the city of Christchurch, which was really interesting because that city was devastatingly destroyed by an earthquake. I forget what the year was, but a couple of years before doing this project. And then they were in the process of sort of rebuilding. So it was really interesting to go allow people to wander the city and sort of, to the extent that they could. A bunch of it was shut down because it was so, things were about to fall over even more.
Right.
But have people think about the past and the future all at once. Sort of, this is where I used to go to see my favorite bands in this building that is now destroyed, but I no longer can. But I have these fond memories of it. But also, well, it's a clean slate in some sense, and that's this incredible opportunity for a city to sort of. I mean, organic growth is wonderful, but sometimes it's nice to be able to plan things out in a way. Of course, getting consensus on the plan is very challenging, but this project was sort of part of people kind of musing about what was possible for the future and what was interesting and important and nostalgic to them from the past. And I think audio can help do that time travel in some ways. So
Right.
that's another example of that kind of project. And then maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, I started getting more and more into AI stuff, which again, that's a that's a broad topic.
It's a broad topic. So let's talk about it because it's interesting. Obviously, right now, there's a lot of stuff going on in AI because of the explosion that's happened in, probably less than a year.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I know. It's like 6 months in some way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
but and it's
that
very
degree or
controversial in the art community as well. So I would like to know, like, you said you've been looking at this from several years ago. So what were you looking at several years ago? What were some of the things that intrigued you?
Sure. Yeah. My first forays into sort of what I would, I mean, I still have an issue with the term AI. The intelligence part of it is not really there, but nonetheless, that's what
We've
call
come
it.
to accept that as a term. I agree with you there.
Yes. Yes. The other term we've come to accept, for better or for worse, is deepfake.
Right.
Which
That's a very specific kind of thing, though.
Exactly. That's a very specific kind of thing. I prefer to use the slightly larger bucket of synthetic media, but again, that's confusing. Deepfake just has obviously a lot of sort of negative connotations, I think, that go along with that term.
Is that how you connected with Ryan because of the work that he was doing for his the Chimera stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I connected with Ryan because because of his work on Welcome to Chechnya,
Yeah.
I had already done this piece called Innovative Moon Disaster, which premiered in 2019, which was a use of synthetic media, I think, similar to Ryan's work, trying to be very sensitive to and sort of have a pro-social use of the technology. Of course, in Ryan's sense, obscuring the identities of people who would otherwise be in big trouble
Sure.
getting their story out. And in my case, trying to use this technology that that is essentially a disinformation machine, and a machine of, falsely representing people, and try to use that to create awareness about how this kind of technology is coming, and it's going to be a challenge for us, much like how Photoshop was a challenge at one point.
Right.
It is no longer really a challenge, but this is probably a bigger challenge. And how do we get out ahead of it a little bit and try to create awareness? And in the case of the Moon Disaster Project, that was essentially a deep fake, for lack of a better term, of President Nixon delivering a speech that was written for him were the Apollo 11 mission to have failed, and ended in tragedy with the astronauts not making it back. And that was a real possibility. So a speech was written while they were like hurtling towards the moon.
But it was never read. It was never read. It was just written. Right.
It was written, and it was never read, and it was preserved in the National Archives. That's something that's supposed to happen if you
Yes, if you write something, you're supposed to go to National and not supposed to be in a chest in your bathroom.
That's what I've heard. I've learned that lately. But in any case, that is but it was this gorgeous, elegiac, like amazing speech that I wasn't alive during Nixon's time, but I did watch a lot of his speeches during this project, and yes, a lot of them were not of that sort, but nonetheless, it was this beautiful, beautiful speech. So we decided that we could take this real thing, this real speech that never happened, and use this, technology to create things that never happened, synthetic media, deepfake technology, put those together, and give voice to this beautiful speech, sort of in a sort of alternative history context, where our film is like an 8-minute film. Only the last 2 minutes are the deepfake, but the whole part before is archival footage of Walter Cronkite saying, here we are, we're counting down to the blast off. You see the astronauts getting onto onto the rocket and blast off and hurtling through space, getting to the moon, and then beep beep beep, some computer malfunction, something's happening, go to black. Then we scramble, get back to Earth in the White House. People are setting up chairs, trying to hurriedly prepare for Nixon to deliver something. He comes in and then delivers this speech. So the idea is to sort of create an entire fake message with basically all real material, and then critically wrap the whole thing in this educational awareness, wrapper that allows us to, hopefully not purvey more moon's conspiracy theories, but rather try to sort of show how this stuff can happen. And if we can get you to believe for a second that the moon landing didn't happen the way it is imprinted into your brain, then, think about all those messages, all those videos, all that material coming through your social media feed that may also be similarly, manipulated or augmented in some way to try to get you to believe something different, to behave in a different way, to, something like that. So that was the hope. It's a fine line between, using technology to create fake things and using it to sort of uncover those things. But we tried.
I think that's a really interesting thing because, obviously this is something I've got a lot of interest in. As a lot of my listeners know, I have a huge interest in digital humans and also some of the things that are happening in terms of technology with AI and deepfakes. And it was interesting during that time, 2019 and early 2020, just before the pandemic, I was asked to go on a lot of panels because people are like, it's all going to be fake. They're going to screw up the election and this whole thing is going to be a big problem. And I thought, things like what you showed are important because they show like, I am telling you this is fake and you should see how good it looks, even though it's fake. Right. And I think like Jordan Peele tried to do the same thing when he made the Obama video. Right. And he was like, I am telling you that this isn't real, but I want you to know how possible it is. Right. And I think those are really important messages. And that's basically the best way for us to do. So don't just automatically assume that what you just saw is correct. Right.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And I think that, there's lots of really important sort of prongs of this initiative that needs to happen to sort of try to inoculate society. And, my skills are more in this aesthetic, artistic arena. And, coming at people that way, can be really impactful. Also, of course, doing things like digital watermarking and other technical things to try to suss out what's fake and what isn't is incredibly important too, because there's most of these fakes are indistinguishable. I mean, if you have enough time, you can make an indistinguishable piece of
it doesn't
content.
even need to be that good. I'll tell you exactly why, because I just saw recently there was do you remember the bad lips reading videos? You know what I'm talking about? They're hilarious, right? So they did a whole bunch with Ron DeSantis as a joke, right? And then there was a little clip of him being excited about a hot dog, and it was like just him and it's clearly it went on social media and everyone thought it was real. It's like, it is not clearly not even close to being good.
But I guess if you want to believe that Ron DeSantis is an idiot, if that made him look like an idiot, I don't know.
Yeah,
but
and that's what they wanted, right? And it was like, that is not... there's got to be some objection. And by the way, I'm all for parody. I'm all for interesting things. That's all good. Deepfake Tom Cruise is hilarious to me.
It's great, totally great.
Yeah.
They did a wonderful job. I mean, Metaphysic and Chris Ume. I mean, those guys are.
I've met those guys. Yeah.
Amazing. Their technology is wonderful, and they're doing some amazing stuff.
Yeah.
It's really so many lots of small and big companies are getting into this, and there's a lot of concern about the ethics and a lot of convenings and groups that are consortiums that are being created. And it's a really exciting time in that regard. And, at the same time, when you're trying to create something in the midst of, the technology moving so quickly and the norms not being established, it's exciting because you can maybe help establish some of these norms, but it's also a bit nerve-wracking, and it's really hard to know always what the right thing to do is. And, we got to keep on persisting and try and then, correct course as we go, depending on, the outcomes.
Now, I know, obviously, based on what you explained, I know the motivation of what you wanted to try to say in a message from that video, which I think was good. But what was the thing that said, this is what I'm going to do? Like, I'm going to do that. Like, did you find the speech? Did you know about this speech and say, oh, this is how I'm going to create this, like an alternative of this?
Yeah, it did come from that. And I should be clear, I'm not the only one who did this project. My co-director, Francesca Panetta, was, we were in it from the start together.
Sure.
We had lots of other folks who participated. But the initial idea sort of came from, actually, I'm from Boston, and I'm a fellow at MIT in the Open Documentary Lab there. And the only reason to mention that is because Fran, my co-director, was a fellow at the Nieman Fellow at the time, which is a journalism fellowship at Harvard. And there were sort of, there's lots of sort of mixing between these different fellowship programs.
Sure.
and the academic world. I'm not really a part of the academic world, but I bump up against it in this way. And it's wonderful for me as an independent person to meet new people and whatnot. In any case, there's a Knight Journalism Fellowship as well. And Fran and I met and had a bunch of actually audio similarities that we did. So we became good friends. And then we would meet every Friday with a couple of other journalists and who are interested in technology and sort of where things were going. And we started talking about it was the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. So we started talking about the moon, and then somebody brought up this speech, and we were like, oh yeah, I've seen some stuff. There was a great, the Truth podcast was done with this speech a long time ago, which was wonderful, Jonathan Mitchell. And then we were talking about deepfakes, which is, we talked about that a lot. And then it was like this moment where we were all sort of like, wow, we have something that's amazing and beautiful and never happened. And then we have this thing that creates things that never happened.
Right.
And we have this opportunity to sort of do this in a context of this seminal historic event in humanity, which, AI also might be one of.
Right.
And it just sort of, came together in this sort of wonderful collective way. And then we pursued it from there, needing to get funding and all of that. But it sort of came from this, just sitting around talking about stuff with a group of people who you like and enjoy and who are smart and interesting and have good ideas. And, the ideas are definitely not, the majority of them have nothing to do with me, but, I'm kind of there and we all kind of contribute it comes together. So.
Well, I think that's amazing. And I like to know a little bit, I mean, obviously, since there are some tech geeks that listen to this, what were some of the techniques? I mean, you obviously had a bunch of archival footage, right? And you had a written speech. So how did you, first of all, how did you convert that written speech to sound exactly like Nixon? What technology do you use to do that?
Right. I can go through that for sure. And I will caveat it with being that this was 4 years ago, and that's like 1,000 years.
1,000 years, yes. But nonetheless, it's still
very different.
Yeah.
It's very different now, and I can talk about it now.
Yeah,
too,
sure.
But back then, when it was really hard to do, we were working with a company called Respeecher, an amazing startup out of Kiev. They're Ukrainian. They've been keeping it going throughout all the insanity of the past 2 years. 2 years now, a year and a half at least, and they're amazing. And they were one of the only companies at the time that was developing what's called speech-to-speech voice synthesis or voice cloning. And speech-to-speech is as opposed to text-to-speech. And what that means is that instead of taking text written on a computer and feeding that into a model and having the model produce an audio voice that speaks those words, instead of doing that, it takes in an audio file, a WAV file, an MP3 of somebody speaking, and then converts that. It doesn't even know what it's actually saying. It just converts the sounds of that performance into a different person. So it's basically a way to be able to capture a performance of somebody delivering something and just make it sound like it is a different person doing the speaking. And for us, for Fran and I, it was absolutely critical not to sound robotic. We didn't want this to sound like, or at least to try to try as much as possible not to sound robotic. Right? So we were able to use this speech-to-speech technology, which basically enabled us to get an actor. We hired an actor, Louis D. Wheeler, who was wonderful, who would, we can say, deliver the speech and, do it slowly, do it presidentially, pause here a little more, all these sorts of things, and direct him as we would direct anybody. But then that audio would be converted into President Nixon's voice rather than we experimented with text-to-speech. And trust me, back then especially, it didn't sound anything like an actual person delivering a speech. So long story short,
but the system had to be trained on Nixon's voice, and obviously there's plenty of speeches that he has made, right?
And not just Nixon's voice. It also, at that time, and this is one of the big ways things have changed recently, it also had to be trained on the actor's voice. So we actually built an AI model. Respeecher built an AI model that had one specific purpose. And that very specific purpose was to be able to convert Louis D. Wheeler's voice into Richard Nixon's voice.
Right.
And that was it. It wouldn't do anything else. It was trained just to do that. And the way to train a model to do that is to...
So it was more like Louis to Richard, not speech to speech.
Exactly. Yeah. In that sense, it was. Right. Yeah. So if I gave my voice, and we put that into it, it would just be a total mess.
Interesting.
But the way to train the model to do that was to give it tons of what they call parallel data, which are basically pairs of data that are audio clips of Nixon saying something, a 5-second audio clip of Nixon saying something.
And then Louis would have to say the same thing in his own voice, right?
Exactly. Not impersonating Nixon, but saying it with the same speed, the same cadence, the same sort of, the same representation there. And then the model would say, oh, I've got 1,000 of these things. Now I can say
How long did it take to train?
Oh, God. Poor Louis. He was amazing.
Really?
We were in the studio for like 2 days of just saying, Vietnam speech. It was like all Vietnam speeches too, which was, just got really old listening to sort of belligerent, statements about what's happening over there. And again, this wasn't in my lifetime, so it didn't hit home in that sense,
Right.
but it was just, there was a lot of material that, it's all public domain and whatnot. So, but yeah, there was a system that ReSpeecher had that thankfully made this a little bit easier, where you could, do multiple takes and easily, and then just upload through the web, kind of like what we're doing right now.
Right.
And it worked. But yeah, then that material had to be ingested by their model, and GPUs crunching for days, and then out comes a model that can take any input. And then we had Lewis deliver the speech, as I said before, and then many times, and we would take those outputs, and then we kind of there was a bunch of post-production too,
Sure.
of kind of Frankensteining different versions of what the AI spit out.
Mm-hmm.
Some were better than others, and we would kind of build the most realistic audio clip of the speech that we could.
And then
that was just the audio.
how did you sync that with the video? Like, how did you get the video and audio to work?
The video was a different company we work with called Canny AI. They're actually no longer around, but what they do is, what they called it was video dialogue replacement. People call it all sorts of different
Re-lip
things
syncing,
now.
basically. Yeah.
Neural lip syncing. Yes, it's basically taking a video of somebody saying one thing, and then converting that into saying something else by the input of a different video. So we had a video of our actor delivering the speech. We made sure that video corresponded with the audio we had created.
Mm-hmm.
And then we gave them that video, and they basically, the AI model would be able to take the specific motions of Lewis's mouth and transfer those over to President Nixon's mouth in a clip that we selected to have that done. That is the target video, and we listened and looked at all these Vietnam speeches and all these other speeches, and it turned out that the best speech, based on, because nothing else was changing, just the lips. So we had to have the right demeanor, the right kind of setup. And it turned out that his resignation speech, in some maybe not surprising way, was the best one, because it was a bit it was somber. It was more serious. Wow. And we didn't want the belligerence of a Vietnam speech to be, the table pounding. We wanted it to be more, of a somber feel. So yeah, the resignation speech. So we took a 2-minute clip of that. We tried to line it up with his hand gestures, his looking around, that all stayed. So we had to line those things up as best as possible with the content of our speech, and then just, and then have Canny did the hard work, of doing that model, sort of the lip manipulation. And yeah, there wasn't training on that side. That was Canny had done all the training to sort of have their model understand how the lips move, and transferring that from one video to another. They did all the hard work there, and we just had to provide sort of inputs.
Wow. Well, now obviously this is interesting, because there is new.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
It's telling it. It's giving me. It's like your Siri's talking.
Yeah, I know. My Siri she butts in all the time. She thinks I'm talking to her, and I'm definitely not. Sorry about that. That we can,
That's okay.
So I think she started talking, and that's why I couldn't hear you for just a second. But hopefully she will. She likes to be a part of my conversations.
She likes to be part of it. Yes, the AI is always going to be.
Yes, right.
There is actually something interesting. I talked to a friend of mine, Mike Seymour, who's he's been doing that for translations and dubbing stuff, which is pretty cool.
He does amazing work, and he works with Hal Lee, of course, and I've been working with Hal also, and Hal is amazing, and they do a lot of it's incredible. I mean, it's so good. If you have enough time to make sure things can align in a way that makes sense, it can be just indistinguishable. And I admire all the work those guys are doing. It's great. And
yeah, so you mentioned, obviously, that was 4 years ago and ages ago. How has that technology changed, and is that something you're continuing to look at and continuing to explore that idea right now?
Yeah, definitely. I'm working on a new project right now that sort of requires almost not actually real time, but 2 or 3 minutes kind of, quasi real time creation of, deep fakes using a voice and visuals. And, it's really close to being quite possible to do that, especially on the voice side. The voice side now, you can take 30 seconds of somebody's audio if it's relatively clean, and upload it to one of these services. I'm working with a company called Resemble AI mainly, who does great work, and is very very ethically minded as well, which is a key requirement for me to work with anyone. And they enable you to, if you have proper consent and transparency and everything, they enable you to upload a voice clip of 30 seconds, and then within 3 minutes they create a model that will then allow you to create a synthetic version of that person's voice saying anything you want. Is the quick version as good as the more bespoke sort of longer version that has post-production and all that? No, but it's really good. It's really good. And especially in this day and age when we're used to these conversations where there are little glitches and there's weird things and it's all going through the internet and there's compression algorithms that are doing stuff. And, we don't expect perfection in these kinds of contexts. You can get really close to sounding like people. So that can happen, very, very quickly. So, instead of weeks and months of actors and training models and all this kind of stuff, you can have it go much quicker. I know the Respeecher process right now, they do a lot of like very high-end Hollywood stuff, amazing stuff. And again, that more bespoke work takes a little longer, of course, but it's
Sure.
but then it's just totally pristine, highest quality you can get, and really, really great work. But if you want to just, like you were saying before, it's like you don't have to be perfect to get the point across in a lot of cases, and for better or for worse. And now the voices can be done very quickly. There are text-to-speech models that go even quicker than that, because you don't need the speech input. You just type something in, and it's the ability of some newer text-to-speech models to not sound robotic is incredible. It's definitely not perfect, and it definitely does still, to my ear and probably yours as well, sound somewhat robotic, but it is just so much better than it used to be. If we think about the prototypical sort of Stephen Hawking, voice, that became, his thing. So we kind of identified it with him, but it didn't sound like a person so much as it sounded like, I don't know. I mean, robot is an easy word to use, but that was amazing technology for the time. But now the sort of nuance of the speech can be, inferred by these models, even if they don't get that performative input. And that's crazy. And I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they do it, but they sometimes might not know how they do it either. These AI black boxes are impenetrable in some ways.
Well, what is your goal here? Is your goal continuing to like explore the possibilities of what this is, just to bring awareness to this through art, or what are you trying to accomplish through these ideas?
Yeah, but more or less that. Obviously other goals are me wanting to satiate my creative desires and build stuff that is interesting to people. I also have, I like satiating my interest in learning about these new technologies, and trying to sort of, stay on the cutting edge of what this stuff is, what's happening. But I do have a really, really deep concern about where some of these technologies are going and what could be done and what is being done with them in many situations that is, antisocial. So my work, I really try to have this pro-social, bent on things. And, the large language models, the chat GPTs of the world I'm getting into those in a big way, just sort of learning about how they work. And I have a new project that sort of deals with the law and chat GPT and large language models and sort of how this is going to affect society. I mean, it does really feel like right now is one of these moments where some big wave is coming, and the extent to which the percentage of which that wave is pro-social versus the opposite, call it antisocial, call it something else, is still up for grabs in a big way, and it's really important that we do everything we can to steer it towards the pro-social. I'm just one individual artist, and God knows what effect I can actually have, but I want to try. And it's lucky for me that the trying enables me to satisfy some of these other curiosities that I have. And it's when you're working with technologies that are sort of hip or zeitgeisty, which they are right now, at least not when we did Moon Disaster 4 years ago, not so much, but now they are. That obviously
Right.
helps get recognition as well, which recognition for me is not as much the point as recognition of some of the purposes of the awareness campaigns and whatnot that we're trying to get out. So that's what I hope to do, and juries will always be out on that as to whether I'm.
Well, I'm curious. I'm curious about the feedback here because speaking of short attention span, current state of social media, and not necessarily seeing people don't seem to be very good at nuance anymore, and so. I think that just the fact that you are using this technology to be aware of things. Are people missing the point and just upset at the fact that you're using this technology and don't realize that you're doing it for awareness purposes rather than?
Yes, I mean, certain people definitely are. Obviously, there's no
Right.
way to know what percentage are and what percentage isn't. All I can say is that from the start of every project I do, I think about how to minimize that. And every time,
Right.
the Moon Disaster Project we have an installation version of this as well, which is like, there's the website, moondisaster.org, but then there's an installation, which is, shown at film festivals and museums and things like that, galleries, that is like a 1969 living room, which is when Apollo 11 happened, and like an old vintage TV with, 4x3 CRT, bulbous screen, and you walk in, the decor is from that time. You're sort of walking back in time into this place, and you sit down, and then you watch as if you're having a Super Bowl party, but it's for the moon landing, which was something that happened in
Yep.
that time period, and then, oh my God, it doesn't happen the way you thought it was going to happen and whatnot. But the physicality of that affords us the opportunity to put lots of other information out there that's like, this is a deep fake and whatnot, that sort of surround the central message, because we don't want to plaster across President Nixon's face, fake. We don't want to, because that takes you out of the whole. That I think ruins the impact.
Of course.
So we've been very careful with that, and we've modified as we've gone. We've tried different approaches. The first time we premiered this at the International Documentary Film Festival in Amsterdam in 2019, we got a lot of people saying all sorts of things that just weren't, oh, this was filmed, and these artists found this archival film of Nixon doing this, and they just brought it out and sort of using it in that sense. No, or oh, the artist wrote this and they made up Nixon saying it, but the artist wrote it. It isn't real. And there were all these sort of variations that we heard people saying, and we tried to disabuse them of all of those, of course, in the moment, but we're not there all the time. So we modified some of our messaging to try to be even more like, this is fake. If you go to our website, kind of the first thing you see is like, can you spot a deep fake? So we kind of
Yep.
we forward, we try to put that up front while not sort of sacrificing some of the hoped emotional impact that the piece will have. And that's just an ongoing process. And every time there's a new project, there's new ways of labeling. What's the best way to label something? That is critical. When I work with productions, and I'm working with a documentary production right now that I can't talk about the details of, but there's a synthetic media component to it. And it's like, how do you label that in a way that the majority of your audience will understand what's going on, but also have it sort of be aesthetically pleasing and not disruptive? And I think, going back to Ryan, I think Ryan and his whole team with Welcome to Chechnya was incredibly effective at sort of coming up with a subtle sort of in situ way of highlighting which faces were not the real face of the individual. And then obviously, they explained things sort of pre and post as well. But during the actual film, there was that sort of reminder for viewers that there was something
Right.
different about it, without, again, plastering over it or blurring the face completely or whatever other more,
Right.
sort of less subtle
But they did. I mean, I think you're exactly right. Like they had to do something to illustrate this fact and do certain things, right? So, like for example, he doesn't like to use the term deepfakes for what what he did, but he needs to find another way of saying that because deepfakes imply that you're fooling someone, right? Or implies it, and there's all this connotation of revenge areas, and all this, right? But he also put little outlines around, like he didn't completely clean up. The thing, so you could see that this was a mask in a sense,
digital,
right?
I mean, what does he call it? A digital veil or something like that? There's different terminology, or a halo of sorts, and
But yours was very, very good. I mean, like I looked at it, I was like, I know this is not real. I figured it out. I figured out what's going on, but it was like, it's really good, right? Like the lips are looking well. The video footage looks really good. And it's pretty impressive what you're doing. And obviously you've probably gotten even better these days. But I'm also curious about, there are actually huge teams of people now that are working in, video forensics specifically to try to do this. Have you thought about, because of, you're working with people who documentaries, et cetera, who chief footage, do you work with those guys, or you heard of companies that do that stuff?
So when you say digital forensics, do you mean folks who are trying to suss out what is fake versus what is real? Or
yes,
right, okay, I mean, I wouldn't say work with as much as sort of interface with at different whether different gatherings of different sorts. I've certainly there was one individual who was interviewed for a piece that Scientific American did about our moon disaster project that was a guy who he's an academic, and his research is all based on sort of trying to use different techniques to interrogate video clips and sort of see what is fake and what isn't. Our clip was very easy for his software to say, look, it's not real, and that made me very happy. I'm like super happy about that. But it's really an interesting, where is the world going to go? Are we going to go to a place where everybody needs to prove that you're real, or are we going to go to a place where all videos run through some kind of pretty good detector and then given some stamp at that point? I mean, are people going to assume everything's false before they assume it's true, or the opposite, or it's just this? It's so.
I mean,
crazy.
I think these days, the lens on this camera on this thing is really small, and somehow it takes pictures that are as good and sometimes better than a piece of film that big, right? So a lot of processing takes place into these things to the point where whatever photograph you're getting out of this is not really the photograph that it took at all.
Yeah, I know. Did you hear about that moon photograph?
I was going to bring up the Samsung moon picture.
Well, you could probably describe it better than me, but it's that was crazy. That was.
Yeah, someone actually literally took a picture of a white circle and a black square and then zoomed in from the other side of the room, and it magically turned into the moon because it thought that's what he was trying to take a picture of.
Right. So the implication, of course, is just like you said, when you do take a picture of the moon, it isn't at all what you took the picture of. It is something that is, some high resolution, or
it's a bunch of dirt that is like, this looks like you're trying to take a picture of the moon. Here's a picture of the moon instead.
Yeah, which if you think about that sort of applied broadly to, existence, society, it's just like everything turns brown, it's like, no offense to brown, but it's sort of like everything just, there's no bright, exciting, like out of the realm of normal things that happen, because that's these unexpected moments are not, they're by definition not going to be part of an AI's training data because they're so.
By definition, they're going to give you the most expected result.
Right, which is why AI systems are, in some sense, totally regressive, and that is like, what's happening? That how is our society sort of this thing that's supposed to change all of society in some sense, super regressive, which.
Well, isn't the promise that it's going to take care of the mundane for you so that you can focus on the progressive?
Yeah, leave the progressive up to the human.
I'm just trying to.
Hey, I'm a fan of the positive potential. I totally am.
Sure.
I'm not a naysayer, but I think there's some sort of I mean, that's one of the concerns that's out there. It's interesting. Some of the recent research that academics and others have done on what happens when you train an AI model, specifically an LLM at this point, I believe, on data that isn't entirely organic, data that is partially organic and partially synthetic. What happens to the efficacy of that model? How does it perform on baseline tests and whatnot? And at least initially, as I understand it, the performance of the model goes down very quickly when you start training it on stuff that isn't
Right.
real. So, the market for purely organic data sets, from pre 2021 is just going to be like, a hot market. And because the internet is,
Yeah.
what percentage of the internet is synthetic right now? I don't know, but it's
some of the systems have gotten worse at math than they were before.
yeah, thankfully not the systems that were designed to do math, but nonetheless.
Yeah, right, exactly.
It's a wild thing.
So I do want to talk a little bit. I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of debate recently. There was a congressional hearing that happened. Someone I know, Carlo Ortiz, was up there for the congressional hearing, specifically surrounding the concept of copyright and artist copyright and things of that nature. Yeah. What are some of your feelings about that and how these systems are created around that idea of copyright, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean that brings in, I think, some of the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strike stuff as well, where there's all sorts of totally legitimate concerns about how models are basically training themselves on copyrighted material and then spitting out material that is effectively, that is not copyrighted by the same people, for sure. And who it is copyrighted by is, as far as I know, still sort of up in the air. So yeah, I mean, as an artist, as a creator, as somebody who, I guess it's possible something I've done is in some training set somewhere. It's, my work isn't, I'm not a writer, so, I'm not in an LLM most likely, but, I have a lot of sympathy for that. That's a totally legitimate gripe and concern. And, I do agree that there should be some compensation model for this, but I understand enough about the technology to be at a loss for exactly how one does that. It's very difficult. I mean, there are companies working on, demystifying what's actually going on inside the AI when it gets to, the output that it gives. Like, why did it come up with that? Anthropic is doing some great work on that. They're really focused on it. Their constitutional AI system is, and I forget what term. There's some term that's used for, being able to go back and look at what happened and sort of see what's happening as to how it's quote unquote reasoning. And that could be applied perhaps to, what influences there are that have led to the output. And then there could be some kind of fractional divvying up of joint copyright. I mean, who knows? But it's a really complicated but really important situation because, if the suits get their way with the WGA and put writers' rooms being predominantly AI, then, they're poisoning their own well, because the AIs just aren't going to be able to keep on doing. I mean, they don't do creative new things now, but it's going to get even worse if they don't have that sort of new human-based organic input. So
I agree. I mean, honestly, I'm jokingly says like a lot of movies today seem like they're already written by an AI, so it's not super surprising. Yeah. But I actually also think that it's interesting that it's happening at this very moment, because I think there is a rebellion in the film industry before the strikes, where people were not going to movies seeing the same stuff over and over again. They're looking for fresh, they're looking for new ideas. And I think it's hilarious that at this point it's like, oh no, we're just going to replace you with a bunch of AI. So it's like, you're already losing because you're having unoriginal ideas, and now you want to take care of the only thing that's going to stop you or make you original. So.
Yeah, I know. I totally agree. At the same time, I will say that I do not the solution isn't just don't allow AI to be a part of this stuff. Like, first of all, I don't think that's practical because it's just going to become more and more infiltrated into everything in our lives. But I also think that AI as a tool, as an idea generator, as an inspiration for things, is could be quite useful. I mean, I started out 20 years ago with building different sorts of random number generators and sort of musical randomizers that create different arpeggios, and I just listen to it for 5 minutes until that one, I like that one, and I just take that one and then use that in some way. And that I didn't write that arpeggio, but I created the system that asked for variations to be created within certain parameters, and then I selected the one I liked, and then I use it. And that to me there's nothing, I've done all the creative work there essentially. And I think that ChatGPT and whatever else can be used similarly. People get good at prompt engineering and putting stuff in and getting stuff out, and then taking little ideas and then developing them from there. And that's a perfectly valid approach, the sort of cyborg approach, the human in the loop approach that I feel is much more likely to be feasible, but also could be quite positive. Could be quite positive. But that emphatically, I will state again, writers need to be the driving force in this particular, or the creators, whether it's writers or musicians or whomever, they need to be the driving force. And I think that's the only way the output is going to really be, continuing to sort of push creative boundaries and go in interesting directions for human consumers. Maybe there will be a breed of AI consumers in the future that will just love this sort of derivative stuff, and it'll get excited about that. But that's not, right now the consumers of this stuff are humans, and our brains remain organic. And I think there's something about having an organic, driver in the creation of these things that, we probably can't put our finger on exactly what it is, but there's something there that gives us that sense of satisfaction and enjoyability and emotional, reaction.
Well, I think it's really interesting to sort of embrace where technology is, even if you think of the challenges that it has or against it, and not necessarily outright reject it. Although there's reasons for that. I mean, I remember talking to Phil Hale, who's a famous artist, and he did not like anyone using Photoshop because he thought undo was cheating.
Hey, that's an argument. You can make it.
And that's I get what he's saying. It makes sense. I mean, that's his process is layers and layers and layers, and the mistakes that you make are part of the process that you go forward in terms of that, and that's his journey that he's going for. Which I understand. But, I think it's also at the same time, I think it's really cool that you are looking at these tools and saying, I understand all the problems with AI and I'm going full force using it so I understand it even better.
Yeah. And if we don't have, I was a sort of co-signer of a open letter to, when the AI Digital Bill of Rights, the AI Bill of Rights was being comment period. And a group of artists and creative people got together and said, basically, in simple form, we want to be a part of this. We need to be us, people like us, not necessarily specifically us, but people who are artists, who are creators, who are, this sort of individual needs to be a part of this discussion, not just policymakers and technology developers and platform maintainers and lawyers, and all of which are important constituents, very important. But, artists, creators need to be in the conversation in order to keep this stuff going. And I think the only way to be in the conversation in a meaningful way is to dive in and try it. And, I've tried so many AI tools and so many things that are not useful to me and not interesting to me. And that's fine. That's expected. It doesn't mean they're bad tools. It just means they're not the thing for me. But doing that experimentation and going through that process and learning about what is there, what is available, and how these things might interact with each other and with me and with an audience, that's a thought process that will have some effect on my future work that I do want to put out there and does actually end up being, something official instead of just a noodling around with stuff. And that's, all part of the process.
I mean, I find it interesting, like Adobe right now, obviously they're talking about Firefly and their own AI system, and they keep referring to it as an ethically sourced AI model, right? Which I think is kind of a funny, it's like, organic salt, which is not organic, but
it's possible their marketing team had something to do with that labeling. I'm just throw that out.
Yeah, which is, listen, it's fine at this fine, but I started to think about it. It's like, okay, well, let's take that term more seriously, or at least the concept of what they're trying to accomplish. Do you think that at some point there could be like nutrition labels on AI models? Like, this is where this come from. These are the sources that, natural, not copyright materials, consent, or compensating the people who've created this, or whatever it is. Do you think that's going to be something that could be
Yeah,
out there?
I love that idea, and that's already being discussed. There's actually a friend of mine, a wonderful
Right.
artist, Newman, who works on is one of the co-founders of a project called the Data Nutrition Project, and it's literally just almost exactly this, where it's like they take
Right.
the idea of how much sugar is in this percent. You can't really. I mean, the analogy is a wonderful one. Obviously, there's challenges with all analogies, but the idea at a core of just what you were saying, sort of, where did this training data come from? What are the constituents of it? What are the biases ingrained in that are probably going to be represented in all outputs as well? What are the ways to coalesce the important critical data that these models should share with everybody using them, and then kind of put that label on there. Of course, labeling is always a reductive thing, and you can't capture everything, but at the same time, the concept is, even just having it, even if somebody doesn't read the label, just the fact that they see that it is on there, I think makes people think a little bit differently about, oh, there's something in this that I should be aware of. And that's really important.
Right.
So yeah, totally into that idea. I love the Data Nutrition Project. Everybody should go look that up. It's wonderful. There are probably other sort of vaguely similar things going on, but yeah, I mean, Adobe, I have all sorts of pros and cons with all the big tech companies, but Adobe doing this and making a big splash of it and promoting various watermarking techniques and all that is great. It's really great. And,
Right.
Is it exactly the right thing at the end of the day? Is it going to be the perfect thing? Probably not, but, they're working on it and they're doing it, and, power to them. And, the fact that they've integrated it into Photoshop in ways that can be part of digital artists' workflows is fascinating and incredibly useful. So, it's I think it's still, honestly, I think there still might be core challenges to this stuff. If I were a digital artist using Firefly generated stuff or partially Firefly generated stuff, within whatever I'm working on, I don't know. It's hard to be totally confident in anything that you're doing now with this stuff from a legal standpoint, but I feel confident enough to go ahead with it. It's just, we'll see what shakes out, but I'm glad people are working on it, all sorts of levels.
Yeah, I mean, Adobe obviously has been integrating different kind of machine learning tools into almost all their stuff, just denoising or whatever else they're doing, upscaling. And so it's really interesting to sort of think about that process. So
yeah, totally.
Well, listen, we've gone about an hour. This is fascinating stuff. There's, I'm sure, a lot more that people can learn about you. Tell people, where can they go? Where can they get more information? What is your website, your social media channels? What are some of those things?
Yeah, I mean, it's all in various states of disarray, to be honest, but halseyburgund.com is my sort of artist website. I have a website for the Roundware geolocated audio platform, which is roundware.org, and you can go there and get to the code from there if you want. Check that out. The project, the AI Nixon Moon Disaster Project, is a good representation of my recent work with AI, and that's moondisaster.org, and you can check that out. I am on the socials, so to speak. I'm not a big what do we call it? We call it Xer now. Since Twitter is now gone.
I don't know what that is.
I don't know. I don't X very much, but okay. I'm on there, and I can be contacted through those media for sure. But I'm not a prolific poster of those. More of a not prolific consumer either. But I'm there on Facebook, Instagram. Get me on LinkedIn. So, but it's almost always either H. Burgund or Halsey Burgund. I'm lucky in that my name, as far as I know, there's no other one with both parts. So that's convenient.
Not true with Chris Nichols. I know many Chris Nichols.
Yes, yeah. But then if you do something horrible, you can just pretend it's the other Chris Nichols, right?
It's true.
So-
It's true. It's true. I actually had a podcast with someone else named Chris Nichols on. So it's
That's pretty good. I think Kevin Kelly did some of that too with his Cool Tools podcast, or maybe Keith Kelly
really?
he had on there. But there was some. It's because that obviously is a fairly common name, but he is
Right.
he's a big fan of his. But that's another topic for another day.
Awesome. Well, your work is really great, and I think it's really awesome that you're trying to bring awareness to the kind of things that we're doing. And obviously, AI has been like front and center on my podcast in the last several months. Has to be brought up all the time, which I think is perfectly fine. I think we need to bring awareness to this and bring different perspectives to this that are very important. So really glad that you're able to share yours as well.
I really appreciate being here and the insightful questions, and just the fact that you're doing what you're doing is, it's all part of this struggle that sort of society is having with coming to grips with what these new technologies are capable of and what the future might bring. And I think all of this is really important from an awareness, et cetera, standpoint. So really honored to be a part, and with your long lineage of amazing guests, and I hope this is useful for your audience.
Absolutely. I think it's a really well fitting for this podcast. So thanks for doing it, man.
All right. Well, thank you so much.